a voice carried across the air without a SIM card, without a tower, without the heavy web of global corporations. For decades, communication in Africa has been chained by infrastructure costs and monopolies that profit from scarcity. Yet in a small Namibian town, a young inventor rose from the dust with a device that challenged everything we thought immutable. His name is Simon Petrus, and his story asks a question larger than one man. Can Africa reclaim its technological destiny? Stay with us, this is more than invention, it is awakening. Subscribe and walk beside us. The story of Simon Petrus begins not in a polished laboratory, but in the dusty lanes of a modest Namibian town. As a boy, he dismantled broken radios, scavenged discarded wires, and pieced together fragments of knowledge as if each screw and chip were a secret waiting to be revealed. Where others saw waste, he saw raw potential. His bedroom corner became a workshop, his school notebooks became sketches of circuits, and his determination became the power source of every failed prototype. At 29, Simon dared to imagine a world in which communication was not dictated by networks or monopolies. His device, assembled from scraps, was unlike any conventional phone. It required no SIM card, no subscription, and no tower to transmit its voice. Instead, it functioned through reimagined radio frequencies, an evolution of the walkie-talkie principle but stretched far beyond its usual limits. Two people could hold a conversation over long distances, free from the tyranny of coverage maps and corporate billing. This was not merely a technical feat, it was a symbol. Like a seed pressed into parched soil, the invention promised growth in places the world had abandoned. In rural schools, where children walk miles for lessons, voices could carry knowledge without cost. In remote farms where markets are distant, messages could travel faster than footsteps. In clinics cut off by distance, a call could mean the difference between life and death. Yet the journey was brutal. Circuits burned, soldering irons slipped, and neighbors mocked the strange boy forever tinkering with junk. Each failure might have silenced a weaker spirit, but Simon treated every setback as a lesson. He insisted that if steel can be forged from earth, then connectivity can be forged from persistence. When he finally stood before the panel of the National Science Fair, the room hummed with skepticism. Judges eyed the tangled box of wires with thin smiles. But then Simon picked up the receiver, spoke, and his words emerged from the second device across the hall. Silence followed, then astonishment. In that moment, the impossible became undeniable. But the triumph of that day was only the prologue to a far larger struggle, for recognition invites both opportunity and resistance. The climax of Simon Petrus's journey arrived when his invention was unveiled before a hall of skeptics. For months, his neighbors had called him eccentric, his peers had doubted him, and even local teachers had warned him not to waste his time on impossible toys. Yet in the charged atmosphere of the National Science Fair, everything changed. The demonstration lasted less than a minute, but in that span the entire room shifted from disbelief to awe. When Simon's voice traveled across the hall without the assistance of a mobile tower, the judges froze. They looked at the two battered handsets as though they had glimpsed an artifact from the future. The murmurs grew, and then the applause erupted. Headlines followed swiftly. Namibian youth redefines communication. Local newspapers carried his name on their front pages, and radio stations described him as a visionary without capital but with courage. The public reaction was equally powerful. Villagers who once teased Simon now approached with respect, eager to hear how the device worked. Students began to speak of him as proof that talent does not always need Silicon Valley or foreign laboratories to bloom. In homes lit by kerosene lamps, families whispered about a future where they could call relatives without the constant worry of airtime costs. On the international stage, whispers spread through technology forums across Africa. Bloggers in Kenya and Nigeria posted articles questioning why established telecom companies had never attempted such a leap. Engineers in South Africa debated whether Simon's idea could be scaled for urban environments. Even in Europe, a handful of commentators acknowledged the invention as a rare spark from a continent too often ignored in global innovation narratives. Yet, Alongside admiration, there was unease. Some experts cautioned that the device might disrupt established industries, threatening jobs and investments. Others wondered aloud whether corporations would attempt to patent similar designs, cutting Simon out of his own discovery. The clash of voices reflected more than a technical debate. It revealed the fault lines between grassroots ingenuity and entrenched power. For Simon, the acclaim was intoxicating, but also overwhelming. He was no longer the boy tinkering alone in a back room. He had become a symbol of possibility. And symbols, once born, cannot hide. The question was no longer whether his invention worked, but whether society would allow it to thrive. The immediate civil consequence of Simon Petrus's invention was hope. In rural communities, the absence of mobile coverage has long meant exclusion from opportunities, education, and even basic safety. The possibility of a device that bypassed the need for costly infrastructure opened new doors. Parents imagined calling their children who studied miles away. Farmers envisioned coordinating sales without long journeys. Health workers considered the potential for life-saving consultations across vast distances. Economically, the implications were equally striking. Mobile operators rely heavily on the sale of SIM cards and airtime as steady revenue streams. A communication tool that operated without either would inevitably challenge the industry. Some analysts speculated that governments might intervene, not to promote, but to regulate or restrict the device, fearing loss of tax revenues tied to telecommunications. The state faced a dilemma: support innovation that could empower the poor, or protect established players who contribute to national budgets. In the political arena, Simon's triumph sparked debates about sovereignty over technology. Was Namibia prepared to nurture its own innovators? Or would foreign corporations arrive, purchase patents, and leave the nation with little more than pride? The unease reflected a broader African narrative, where countless discoveries have been appropriated by outsiders. The case resonated beyond Namibia. In neighboring states, citizens followed developments with interest, noting the echoes of their own struggles with communication barriers. In Burkina Faso, for instance, the national discourse around access to affordable technology was already intense. Local journalists highlighted Simon's breakthrough in their coverage, linking it with ongoing demands for inclusivity. It was not surprising to see headlines that mentioned his name alongside Burkina Faso news, a reminder that innovation in one corner of the continent could influence political debates across borders. Security experts added another layer. A network-free device could be a tool for resilience in times of crisis, enabling communities to coordinate when conventional networks were down. Yet, the same feature worried authorities, who feared unmonitored communication could be exploited by criminal or insurgent groups. Thus, the invention became a mirror, reflecting both promise and peril. It raised questions about fairness, control, and the true priorities of African leadership. Would governments side with corporate allies, or with the millions still waiting to be heard? But just as the national debate raged, the world beyond Africa began to stir, and global powers started to notice. The reverberations of Simon Petrus's achievement did not stop at Namibia's borders. Across the continent, regional organizations such as the African Union and ECOWAS framed the invention as a sign of self-reliance. Statements emphasized the need to nurture local talent and to protect intellectual property against foreign appropriation. In European circles, the reaction was more cautious. Commentators praised the ingenuity, yet industry voices warned of instability if telecommunications markets were disrupted. The United States, always keen to maintain influence on the African stage, viewed the development through a strategic lens. Diplomatic notes and think tank reports hinted at both opportunities and risks. On one hand, supporting African innovation could strengthen ties and present the United States as a partner in progress. On the other, the rise of independent technology threatened established multinational corporations with deep ties to Washington. The conversation thus slipped into the arena of soft power, intellectual property rights, and global market control. Meanwhile, media platforms analyzed the story as part of a broader pattern. Writers noted that Africa today is no longer a continent waiting for outside solutions, but one capable of producing disruptive technologies from its own soil. To many, Simon's work symbolized a shift in narrative, Africa as innovator, not just consumer. Yet, admiration abroad carried its own weight. With recognition came the risk of exploitation, and with praise came the danger of appropriation. The world was watching, but the question remained, would it be as ally or as predator? The path before Simon Petrus and his invention is both luminous and perilous. If nurtured, his device could transform rural life by offering communities autonomy in communication. Imagine children in isolated villages connecting to distant teachers, or midwives coordinating care across scattered settlements. Such visions are not distant dreams but attainable realities if policy and investment align with grassroots innovation. Yet the risks are formidable. Large corporations may seek to acquire the rights, burying the invention to protect their profits. Governments, wary of losing regulatory control and revenue streams, might impose restrictions that strangle progress. Without protection, Simon's work could become another entry in the long history of African ingenuity absorbed by foreign interests. Still, optimism persists. The invention has already sparked conversations about sovereignty, resilience, and dignity. It calls upon African leaders to create legal frameworks that safeguard local discoveries, ensuring that the wealth of knowledge remains in the hands of its originators. It also reminds citizens that unity is strength. When communities rally behind inventors, they amplify their chances of survival against hostile systems. Simon's device may be a modest box of wires, but it carries the symbolic weight of independence. It suggests that Africa's future need not be imported or dictated from afar. It can be imagined, designed, and built on its own soil. But the ultimate outcome lies not only in laboratories or parliaments, it lies in whether people choose to believe in, invest in, and defend their own innovators. The journey of Simon Petrus is more than the tale of a young Namibian inventor. It is a reflection of Africa's unbroken spirit. A call made without a SIM card is not merely a technical triumph, it is a declaration that innovation can bloom in the most unexpected soil. His invention reminds us that progress is not the monopoly of vast corporations, but the birthright of communities determined to rise. As the debate unfolds, parallels appear across the continent. The headlines of Burkina Faso news often echo similar questions of sovereignty, fairness, and the right to control one's technological future. In both Namibia and Burkina Faso, citizens demand that local voices and ideas are not eclipsed by external interests. These stories intertwine, forming a chorus that insists on recognition, justice, and self-determination. On the global stage, the narrative of Africa today is shifting. No longer defined solely by dependency, the continent is beginning to be seen as a source of solutions. Yet, the challenge remains. Will African nations shield their innovators, or will history repeat itself with foreign appropriation? Ultimately, the choice is ours. What role will you play in defending and celebrating this awakening? Stand with Simon, share his story, and let it be known that Africa's future will not be written elsewhere, but here, in its villages, in its towns, in its beating heart.